Welcome to Military Analytics. With the arrival of US-made Patriot air defense systems to the Ukrainian army, the balance in the war has completely changed. In April 2023, Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov announced that Ukraine's skies are much safer with Patriot air defense systems. The Patriots were the latest and most effective contribution from the Western Allies, which also committed tanks, artillery, and some warplanes as Ukraine prepared for an anticipated counterattack. Reznikov thanked the United States without saying how many missile systems were delivered or when they arrived. Ukrainian Air Force spokesman Yuri Inat predicted that the delivery of these systems would be a turning point, allowing the Ukrainians to hit Russian targets from a greater distance. These predictions were very correct because the US-made Patriots used by the Ukrainian forces have performed much better than the original predictions. This situation emerged with an offensive action carried out by the Russians on Ukrainian soil. Let's explore the striking details of this critical news together. The Ukrainian capital recently witnessed a historic night. According to Kyiv officials, Moscow launched a new wave of attacks overnight. The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces announced on its social media account that Russia carried out 18 missile attacks in Kyiv. Kinzhal hypersonic missiles from MiG-34K fighter jets and 9-caliber missiles from ships in the Black Sea. In an update, Ukrainian officials reported that several other missiles were fired at Ukrainian targets, including the short-range, ground-based Iskander. But just in this critical time period, Patriot air defense systems, which are in the inventory of the Ukrainian Armed Forces and virtually closed Kyiv to Russian missiles, came on the scene. Patriot and NASAMS managed to intercept all 27 ballistic and hypersonic missiles of the Russians. But the situation that made this night legendary was very different, because the 6 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles used by the Russian forces in these air attacks were destroyed by the Patriots in the Ukrainian skies. The Patriots used by the Ukrainian army showed that they were working with 100% success on the night that the Russians carried out their airstrikes. Even Russian leader Vladimir Putin did not expect this performance from the Patriots. We think that Putin predicted that Kinzhal, one of the most important hypersonic missiles used by his army, would reach its target. But the Patriots thwarted Putin's dream. The MIM-04 Patriot system has given more than a dozen countries the power to destroy air threats on the battlefield. The system can track 100 threats from 60 miles away, and its missiles cost $3 million each. And although they have a long range, these systems were not primarily designed to defend entire cities. So why did Russian leader Vladimir Putin rely so much on Kinzhal missiles when the Ukrainian army had a very powerful defense system like the Patriot? If you recall, the Kinzhal hypersonic missiles were part of a series of new advanced weapons introduced by Russian President Vladimir Putin in 2018. In addition, the Russian Ministry of Defense previously claimed that it was impossible to detect or shoot down a Kinzhal hypersonic missile. For all these reasons, Russian leader Vladimir Putin relied heavily on these missiles. But the Patriots used by the Ukrainians managed to become the nightmare of the missiles that Putin boasted about. As the attacks of the Russian Air Force turned into a night of shame for Putin, some doubts arose among Western military analysts as to whether the Kinzhal deserved to be classified as supposedly hypersonic. Kinzhal missiles can carry conventional or nuclear payloads, but these missiles succumb to a Patriot defense system. Therefore, we guess the uncertainties in the power theory of Kinzhal missiles will be talked about for a long time. In fact, if the Kinzhal was really a hypersonic missile, as Putin claimed, that is a missile capable of performing complex maneuvers above Mach 5, then it would be extremely difficult to interfere with existing anti-missile systems. However, all indications indicate that the Kinzhal is only an air-launched ballistic missile. So Russia's labeling of Kinzhal missiles as hypersonic is somewhat misleading. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service has previously reported that nearly all ballistic missiles reach hypersonic speeds above Mach 5 at some point during their flight. As a result, these Russian missiles have clearly shown that they are not invincible, just like other missiles that can reach hypersonic speeds. So how do Kinzhal hypersonic missiles compare to Patriot defense systems? Kinzhal, as we mentioned, has been repeatedly praised by the Russian Defense Ministry and military leadership. General Valery Gerasimov, the current head of Russia's operations in Ukraine, announced in December 2022 that the Kinzhal has proven to be extremely effective and vulnerable to air defense capabilities deployed in Ukraine. However, this predates the arrival of Patriot systems, so the king of air defense systems managed to hunt the Russians at the speed of light. Typically fired from Russian MiG-31 jets, the air-launched ballistic missile was introduced in 2018 as part of a new set of advanced weapons. It's estimated to have a range of about 1,250 miles, according to reports in Russian state media. Kinzhal can accelerate up to 10 times the speed of sound. On the other hand, the Patriot system or phased array tracking radar to intercept on target is a ground-to-air guided defense system rather than an air-launched missile, according to manufacturer Raytheon Technologies. Tactical ballistic missiles can respond to a variety of air threats, including advanced aircraft, cruise missiles, and drones. The Patriot system can fire a variety of different missiles, with previous PAC-2 interceptors performing different functions than the later PAC-3 missile family. Also, the Patriots have speeds of around 3,100 miles per hour, according to a 2015 NATO document, and the system has a radar range of over 93 miles. In other words, even these features of the Patriots are enough to prevent Kinzhal. Ukraine currently has only 2 Patriot air defense batteries in its arsenal, one supplied by the US and the other by European partners. These systems, which first arrived in April, fill a critical capability gap to target threats that Kiev forces were previously unable to defend. But the limited number of Patriots means that Ukraine can't really afford to lose one. Still, Ian Williams, Deputy Director of the Missile Defense Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, suggested that while these systems are numerous, there will always be a risk of destruction. It is hardly surprising that the Russians are likely to target the most important Western weapons and missile systems in the Ukrainian army. Also, missile defense is never perfect, and while removing the entire battery can be difficult, all it takes is a successful attack on the phased array radar to render the system potentially useless. And in the electronic warfare field, the Patriot radar emits a prominent clue amongst the noise. Also, Patriots can be visibly detected and tracked through other surveillance, such as satellites or drones. For this reason, the Ukrainian armed forces will have to be very careful about the security of Patriot air defense systems because the USA, which supplies the system to the Ukrainian army, thinks the same thing. U.S. officials suggest that Russian intelligence signals could trace the Patriot to its location outside of Kiev. Also, the Patriot offers a good-sized target on the battlefield, as each battery consists of several launchers, command and control components, and a power plant, as well as several dozen personnel. For this reason, the Patriots can enter the target list of the Russians, but the potential solution is to use traps. Ukraine has successfully used decoys such as wooden units to deceive attackers in the visible spectrum and protect US-made high-mobility artillery rocket systems. Zelensky's army could adapt this tactic for the Patriots as well. Using traps is a simple low-tech method that is surprisingly effective in this battle. In this way, the Ukrainian armed forces can both protect important air defense systems such as the Patriot and neutralize the military ammunition of the Russian army with these traps. There was a huge problem in the Russian army. The biological weapon that Russian troops wanted to use against Ukraine exploded in their hands during this exercise. The balances in the Russian army completely changed. The biological weapon that Putin revealed due to the loss in Ukraine showed all its disgrace. The incompetent Russian soldiers made such a mistake afterward that the headquarters in the region were quarantined. In the last days of the Russian-Ukrainian war, important developments on the front line came one after the other, with the Ukrainian army taking the necessary steps for victory. The Russian army was severely cornered. To get out of the situation, Putin mobilized one of the biggest weapons at his disposal. But even he did not anticipate the incompetence of the Russian army, and things got completely messed up. The fact that Russia no longer had enough say, even in the administration of the regions it had seized at the beginning of the war, such as Zaporizhia and Luhansk, meant that the troops had to be directed to fight with a different weapon. The fact that Ukrainians living in these regions began to rise up against the Russian army was a very important development at this point. In the wake of these recent developments, which turned into a national struggle for the Ukrainian people, Putin needed a more deterrent method. Especially the troubles in Bakhmut enabled Putin to reveal the biological weapons he had against Ukraine. While these latest developments reverberated around the world, there was a huge problem in the exercises, and the Russian army faced its biggest humiliation so far. After a brief retreat from Bakhmut, the Ukrainian army began to deter the frontline forces with periodic attacks. This put the Ukrainian army in a position to turn the war completely in its favor. When all the necessary equipment and troops for the spring operation were ready, the Ukrainian army, which was going to carry out a very large offensive from Bakhmut to the Russian borders, took such opposition that it disturbed Putin. Aware of this offensive, Putin immediately began testing biological weapons in Zaporizhia. Putin, who launched these weapons near Zaporizhia, did not think that he had achieved enough success. So he started to hurry up by making these steps more frequent. His fear behind these unsuccessful steps in recent days was that Ukraine had reached a point where it could end the war. But while Putin wanted these things, he had to face a reality he never wanted. And Russian soldiers have committed their biggest disgrace so far. In one of the last tests of biological weapons, Russian army soldiers did not have the knowledge of one of the secret headquarters of the Russian army. This was quite possible given the large number of inexperienced soldiers who were forced into this area and into battle. The Russian soldiers were ordered to start launching biological weapons into this area. Initially, the secret military headquarters did not take the missiles seriously as they entered the range due to a system error. But this attack right behind them galvanized the entire headquarters. Although an urgent evacuation was ordered, only a few of the soldiers could be evacuated, while a large number of the remaining soldiers inside lost their lives. The Russian army was now facing a bigger problem. The fact that the evacuated soldiers were considered to have the plague led to the quarantine of each of the headquarters in this region, at a time when the Russian army was losing more and more control over Zaporizhia. This latest development threw everything into confusion on the Russian front. The Ukrainian soldiers took this as an opportunity to prepare to march on the Russian army. Initially, the front lines in Bakhmut were broken, and then the Ukrainian encroachment into that area was widely reported in the Russian media. But after this disgrace in Zaporizhia, the Russian people made a very strong move against Putin. The Kremlin did not know what to do when the National Guard was sent to certain regions. The reaction grew like an avalanche. These frames in the Russian press mobilized people who had to send their children to the army on mobilization. After these developments, people who did not want to see their own children as soldiers in the army started to organize some activities against them. At this point, Putin's personal army made a move that would change everything. Putin saw the state of the Russian army after this loss because of the large number of mobilization soldiers who joined the Russian army later. No operation is successful. Realizing that he would not be able to achieve victory against Ukraine with the continuation of such troubles, Putin made a shocking speech. In his victory speech, he said for the first time that Russia's future depends on the course of the war in Ukraine. These developments have shown the whole world what kind of superiority the Ukrainian army actually has on the front line. Putin did not know what to do after this critical step by Ukraine. It has once again become clear that the Russian army was the loser in this incident that shook the Kremlin. But the most important reason for this was the wrong policies from the beginning of the war. It is not yet known how Putin, who has continuously sent in qualified manpower to the region to fight against the Ukrainian army, will act in response to its failures. Because Putin deserves this defeat from the very beginning, because of the missteps he has taken since he came to power. Here are some of these critical steps. It is already known that the Russian army is historically very strong. It is also a well-known fact that the Red Army, which existed before the establishment of the Russian Federation, had a structure that could challenge the United States. However, it is known that this army was preparing a coup against the government and the Soviet Union shortly before the establishment of the Russian Federation. Aware of this, Putin, from the moment he came to power, began purging generals one after another without caring about the history and strength of the Russian army. While this situation brings with it meritless cases, it allows anyone close to Putin to easily rise through the ranks and become senior in the army. The army, which is slowly losing its power due to this lack of merit, does not know what to do now. Putin has already started working to change this situation, which he first noticed in the Ukraine war. But he has suffered so many losses in Ukraine that he himself does not know how to put things back together. The war in Ukraine is at a historic point for Russia, not only in terms of its economic impact, but also in terms of the huge problems it has caused within the military. And this point is expected to turn into a big loss against Ukraine very soon. But even Putin has shown the world with his two actions that he is on the verge of losing this war. Putin took a very big step after the significant support to Ukraine. Previously, Ukraine had no missile or air defense system. The Ukrainian army, which has gained a lot of things with this war, is now very strong. Ukrainian soldiers who are always ready to face Putin now have nothing to fear. But especially with the latest support from the UK, a great fear has begun to manifest itself in Russia. For the first time, the shared storm shadows, which have a range of 250 kilometers with the Ukrainian army. This support has created a huge panic in Russia, and Putin made a very critical move and showed the whole world how likely he was to lose the war. For the first time, Russia faced the possibility of missiles hitting the capital, Moscow. That's why it started to place air defense systems on every street corner in Moscow, one after the other. This step against the Ukrainian army revealed once again how critical the missiles are. When Putin gave his victory speech afterwards, he was not the same person he was at the beginning of the war. He said that this war against Ukraine was very critical and that the outcome of the war would be decisive. It was quite surprising that he took such an attitude towards the country. He said he would normally invade within 2 weeks, but his words, "Russia's fate depends on this war," created a huge tension, and it was understood that the issue of Putin's resignation in case he loses this war was back on the agenda. The eastern Ukrainian city has been the scene of intense fighting for months for Bakhmut. The war was bracing ahead of the expected counterattack by Ukrainian forces. Russia has made one final move in recent weeks to seize the eastern Ukrainian city, which has become of great symbolic importance for both sides. Russia claimed to have completely captured Bakhmut with this critical move, but Russia's claims were quickly denied by Ukraine. The Kiev administration stated that the struggle for the city continues. Russian troops continue to bombard the positions of the Ukrainian forces near the city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. However, only one military conflict has occurred in the past day in the direction of Bakhmut. Russian soldiers opened fire 250 times with different weapons in response. Ukrainian forces also launched attacks as a result of the fierce fighting. 80 Russian soldiers were eliminated, 99 were injured, and 1 Russian soldier was taken prisoner. At the same time, 3 self-propelled howitzers, an electronic warfare system, and an ammunition depot belonging to the Russian troops were destroyed. In addition, the spokesman for the Eastern Group of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Sergei Sharavathy, stated that the Russian troops have returned, and that the Wagner Group mercenaries have been replaced by other units. Sharavathy updated the situation in the Kupiansk direction. In his own words, the Russians opened cannon fire there 342 times to military clashes occurred by Russian soldiers, and 3 airstrikes were carried out. 20 Russian soldiers were eliminated, and 52 wounded. In addition, the Ukrainian army destroyed Russia's 20 cannon. Sharavathy emphasized that despite the news in the Russian media about the so-called success and the goals achieved, the Russian troops could not gain full control in Bakhmut in the last 10 months. Sharavathy added that the rotation of the Wagner Group's meager remnants can be compared to fleeing the battlefield after a defeat. On the other hand, soldiers from Ukraine's 24th Separate Assault Battalion battered the Russian trenches in the southern flank of the city, with cannons fired from old Soviet 30 howitzers from the edges of Konstantinivka, about 19 kilometers west of Bakhmut. It wasn't much different from what they'd been doing for weeks, but the soldiers here spoke of a big change. A 26-year-old commander who wanted to be known by the call sign Chichin reported that the Wagner men had gone and that the ordinary Russians had arrived. Chichin used an anti-Russian ethnic slur to refer to the troops that appear to be replacing the mercenaries. Moving regular Russian troops to defend Bakhmut could create vulnerabilities at other points, stretching hundreds of kilometers along the front. After claiming Bakhmut as completely under Russian control, Prigozhin quickly announced that his forces would leave. But it's difficult to understand Prigozhin's motivations and real plans. Soldiers from the 24th Separate Assault Battalion stressed that they had seen Wagner fighters withdrawn and replaced by regular Russian troops in the areas that they were targeting, but were not sure whether this was a permanent shift or elsewhere. A 26-year-old drone operator who wanted to be nicknamed Chuck said, "Because I know Wagner is not a fair player, I won't believe them until I see what the captured soldiers say." Chuck expressed hope that the Wagner forces will leave, which has adopted unorthodox strategies that they have difficulty coping with. Chuck noted that fighting regular Russian forces is not as difficult as fighting Wagner. Ukrainian forces reiterated that they still have a small foothold within the borders of the city of Bakhmut. Authorities insisted they had made gains on the flanks of the city, which they said were part of a semi-siege plan. Theoretically, this plan would allow them to retake the city in part by forcing the Russians to withstand artillery fire from higher ground. Even if this plan has not reached its goal yet, the determination of the Ukrainian forces brings them closer to this plan, step by step. On the other hand, the 24th Separate Assault Battalion was first formed as a volunteer force in 2014 during the conflict with Moscow-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine. This battalion is currently part of the 53rd Mechanized Brigade. The battalion recently completed an end-day offensive against Russian-held positions around Bakhmut. Chichin noted that his units were operating 24 hours a day, firing sometimes 100 rounds during that period in an old warehouse on the outskirts of Chusovaya, west of Bakhmut, on the outskirts of Chasiv, used by Ukrainian soldiers as a logistics center. A 29-year-old company commander with a code sign, Mozart, pulled out a map. Mozart reported that they had taken 1.5 kilometers in the direction of Shuka, on the southern flank of Bakhmut. Infantry units were now in defensive mode and were defending the positions they had taken. Mozart stated that his troops were no longer fighting Prigozhin's mercenaries. In addition, the Ukrainians are under heavy bombardment. Dr. Dexter, 23, from the area serving as a first aid post at Chasiv, said that they currently see very few injuries from firearms but many from the shelling. Some Ukrainian officials and analysts have argued that Kyiv used the Battle of Bakhmut to deplete Russia's strength and energy ahead of a long-awaited Ukrainian counteroffensive. Mozart expressed his hopes for the impending counterattack, but other analysts report that a semi-encirclement policy promoted by Ukrainian military officials will require more resources to be sent to Bakhmut when it's not a strategic priority. In another development, Ukrainian forces are making the final preparations for the long-awaited counteroffensive with the help of Western-supplied equipment after surviving a Russian offensive over the winter. High-ranking Ukrainian officers and spokesmen say that the counteroffensive has already begun, blunting Russia's winter offensive in Donbass and enduring almost endless airstrikes against targets across the country. Mikhailo Podolyak claimed that the intensity of Ukraine's counterattacks has already increased as Kyiv forces specifically targeted Russian supply lines and ammunition depots. But Podolyak said it was a complex process that was not a matter of a specific date or a specific time, curbing expectations for a quick victory. The presidential advisor warned Putin that as the counterattack gains momentum, Russia will face more attacks from rebels who launched a daring raid on the Belgorod border region last week. The advisor predicted that Russia would lose control as a result of the Kremlin's disastrous war. Podolyak denied that the Russian rebels acted on Kyiv's orders, but stated that the Ukrainian government sympathized with their actions and political goals. On the other hand, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Valery Zaluzhny, made a frank-shirt statement along with a video on Twitter and Telegram. Valery Zaluzhny said, "It's time to take back what belongs to us." The video shows a proud, vengeful, and well-armed country ready to turn the tide of war. This is propaganda designed to prepare Ukraine and its allies for the upcoming war and to frighten Russian soldiers with the weapons systems they fear, namely Leopard 2 and HIMARS. In summary, the Ukrainian counteroffensive may not start with sudden simultaneous attacks. Instead, it may show an increase in the rhythm of shaping operations to prepare the battlefield for several days or even weeks. Every offensive behind the line, every raid, and psychological warfare that pushes the Russian forces away from the front brings Ukraine one step closer to the launch of its artillery and mechanized attacks. It's only a matter of time before the tensions on the front lines rise in the coming days. Will the Russian troops be able to resist the counterattacks of the Ukrainian armed forces? We'll have to wait and see.